Good morning, Europe. It's a brand new week. Our top stories for you this hour. Securing power. Turkey's Erdogan wins high-stakes elections, surviving the most serious challenge yet to his position and tightening his grip on power. No consensus. EU leaders walk away empty-handed as a mini-summit on migration ends on a deeply divided note. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
We have the latest on two boats carrying hundreds of migrants with nowhere to go.
Brexit backlash. Thousands march through London calling for a new vote as business leaders square off with politicians. Plus, road to equality. Saudi women start driving for the first time as a new campaign pushes for more freedoms. Thank you for joining us this hour. It's the first round win he was hoping for, and it gives him sweeping new powers. Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his AK party have claimed victory in Turkey's presidential and parliamentary elections. The opposition hasn't officially conceded yet, but it says it will continue its democratic struggle, quote, whatever the result. Evelyn Laverick has the story.
He took a risk by calling snap elections earlier than he needed to, but Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan is now all set for another term as president, but with a difference. This time it will be a souped-up presidency with sweeping new powers. In typical Erdogan style, he declared victory before the Supreme Election Council had made it official. He then went to Ankara to address his supporters.
The winner of this election is democracy, the will of the people, and directly our nation itself. The winner of this election is every citizen of our 81 million population who've participated in this festival of democracy. I thank every one of them.
The race for the presidency had been fiercely contested, but Erdogan passed the 50% threshold to avoid a runoff. His nearest rival, Muharrem İnce, came in on around 30%, but it didn't go all his way. Erdogan's AK party has lost its absolute majority in parliament, and the Kurdish People's Democratic Party can now take up seats. Erdogan may have stated democracy was the winner, but Muharrem İnce wasn't taking any chances. He's said to have spent the night at the Electoral Commission's headquarters to ensure a fair count. Erdogan will now become the longest-serving and most powerful Turkish leader since Kemal Atatürk, the founder of modern-day Turkey. His new executive powers will allow him to appoint senior political and judicial figures, but critics fear this will further tighten his grip on power. Evelyn Laverick, Euronews.
Well, what does this mean for Turkey and for Europe? We'll be bringing you analysis throughout the morning. And for now, I'm joined by Sertaç Aktan, a journalist on our Turkish service. Thank you, Sertaç, for joining us today. So we saw that, a very polarized election. We saw incredible pictures as well. What has the reaction been to Erdogan's win?
Well, as you very well put, it's extremely polarized. 52% for Erdogan, and he got it done in the first round and secured his strong executive presidency as he wanted. And his closest opponent got Muharrem İnce a bit over 30%, and he was heavily criticized due to accepting defeat through a WhatsApp message to a journalist instead of making a speech last night to the millions who were working hard to make it a fair election and standing with the ballots all night. So what we see is that the most controversial thing about the election was the cover of the election, because there was only one source, and that was a state news agency. And the opening results were started at 63% and went all the way to dramatic decrease to 52%, which many believe it was a heavy manipulation.
Yeah, and you mentioned there Muharrem İnce. He was widely seen as the opposition, but in fact he didn't do so well as expected. But we do have a pro-Kurdish party, HDP, which won more seats than expected. Well, how will that impact the balance of power?
Well, that is the little victory out of this whole thing for the opposition, that the HDP passed the threshold and went to the parliament, and therefore AKP lost its absolute majority. But that doesn't make much difference, because with the backing of the hardline nationalists, Erdogan can still pass any law he wants.
Yeah, and everyone is watching and thinking about what is going to happen to Turkey next.
Well, it depends how you look at it, because from one perspective, nothing changed. Erdogan already had near absolute power, and it just became official now with the whole structure of the new governance system. And from the other perspective, things have just got better because it becomes faster, efficient, and therefore more stable.
Yeah, and how will Europe be reacting to this?
Well, Europe was not in favor that much of this new governance system, and there were really heavy criticisms due to this state of emergency, due to the some fair and questions of fair elections, and the new system they're not much very in favor of. So they will continue to criticize it, I believe.
Thank you very much for that, Sertaç Aktan from our Turkish service. Thanks. Now, they agree something needs to be done, but not what or how. 16 EU leaders met in Brussels on Sunday to try to reach a consensus on the migrant crisis ahead of a bloc-wide summit this week. Our correspondent Brian Carter is following the events closely, and he's joining us now live from Brussels. Brian, so what came out of that summit we were watching yesterday?
As you said, Tessa, there were a lot of declarations on the need to cooperate, on the need to work together, but there was no concrete decision. The meeting only lasted for about 4 hours, and there was only 16 member states that were present at this informal meeting. They agreed on some things that are not really politically sensitive, like the need to reinforce Europe's external borders, the need to work better with African countries where most of these migrants depart from, and the need to find a solution for those who are already in Europe and who have not been granted asylum. But the sticking point remains the reform of the Dublin regulation and what to do with the so-called secondary movement of migrants, as you will see in the video that I'm about to show you that will offer a quick recap of yesterday's meeting. 16 European leaders responded to Jean-Claude Juncker's call for an informal meeting on migration. All eyes were on Angela Merkel, who faces a political challenge at home because of her migration policy, and on Giuseppe Conte. His government adopted a hardline policy on migration, and the Italian Prime Minister came to Brussels with a plan to reform EU rules on the matter.
It's a plan that aims to completely overtake the Dublin regulation.
Under the Dublin regulation, the country responsible for an asylum application is the country where the asylum seeker first entered. Mediterranean countries have long argued that this regulation puts unequal burden on them, but reforming it seems to be a major stumbling block, and Italy's plan is not about to change that. The EU Commission and some EU leaders stressed that many other ideas were on the table and that a common European solution is needed.
On one side, you cannot leave the countries of origin on their own because it would mean that they'd have to solve all of the problems on their own. That's not a common solution. But on the other side, human traffickers and refugees cannot choose the country in which they want their asylum requests to be processed, which means here, too, we have to decide who is in charge of which responsibility.
While there was consensus on the need to reinforce Europe's external borders and increase cooperation with countries of origin, France's Emmanuel Macron insisted that refugees should be distinguished from what he calls economic migrants.
Our challenge today is linked to the political pressure in some member states and to what we call secondary migrations in the EU, for those who entered in a country, asked for asylum, and then went to another country. And today we're not efficient enough to bring them to their country of origin, men and women who should not be granted asylum.
There was no mention of disembarkation platforms in external countries or of closed reception centers for migrants in Europe, a sign that many issues still need to be discussed ahead of this week's EU summit. Indeed, now everybody is looking to Thursday and Friday for an important European summit here in Brussels, where migration will be the most pressing issue on the table.
Yeah, indeed, Brian, as you say, we're looking to that big summit, but given how the situation is going into that summit, can we expect anything to come out of it at all?
Well, it depends on which side of the debate you stand on. Most leaders yesterday said they were happy and hopeful that an agreement could be found, but that was among 16 members, and you have 12 more that will be here on Thursday and Friday, including the 4 from the Visegrad group, that is Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland, who do not want to hear about refugees or asylum seekers or migrants in their country. Now, a solution has to be found on, as I said, the Dublin regulation and the secondary movement of migrants, but because they're so politically sensitive and time is of the essence, they will likely focus on issues that are less controversial, and the main of which is to stop the flow of migrants in the first place. Now, several solutions have been put on the table. One is to have so-called closed centers in Europe, in Mediterranean countries, where migrants could potentially stay for an extended period of time waiting for their asylum application to be examined. Another solution is so-called regional disembarkation platforms in third-party countries, in African countries, under the same principle. Now, European leaders insist that this can be done with respect to international law, that this can be done with the cooperation of the IOM and the UNHCR, but all these questions remain on the table, including the whether or not these African countries where these disembarkation platforms will or not accept to have them in their country. So as you can see, time is of the essence, time is ticking, and many EU leaders hope that they will find solutions in order to stop these anti-migrant forces across Europe that are using migration as a means to advance their political agenda. Tessa?
All right, thank you, Brian. Indeed, a big week in Brussels. Brian Carter there. Thanks. So while European leaders are struggling to find that solution, what about the hundreds of migrants who were stranded in the Mediterranean Sea? Well, Alex and the Cube team have been following this story. Alex.
Morning, Tessa. You remember on Friday we brought you the breaking news of 2 vessels with hundreds of migrants stranded in the Mediterranean Sea. And the news this morning is they are still stranded there with nowhere to go. Our team here in the Cube keeping across this story and the latest developments. And we can say at the moment these migrants and these ships find themselves caught between European governments which cannot agree, and in a situation that is seemingly as confusing as it was on Friday morning. But this is the latest tweet from Mission Lifeline. Now, this boat is operated by a German NGO. There are over 200 migrants aboard, and as of the weekend, they were saying, we need a solution for these people. We need a port of safety and at least one EU state to take responsibility for these people. Well, in addition to that, there is a cargo ship, the Alexander Maersk, which has over 100 more people on board. These pictures from last week when Mission Lifeline helped this cargo ship rescue those migrants. So now both of these vessels are in the waters between Italy and Malta. Italy has made it very clear they do not want to accept these NGO ships. Malta has made it clear themselves that they do not want to let these ships dock. So this has heated up an argument between Italy and Malta. Italy's transport minister sending in a Facebook post a quote from a letter which he says is from Malta. And he says, well, the Maltese are refusing this. It's now time for Europe to address Malta's, quote, inhumanity. So a war of words between Italy and Malta. But I just want to leave you perhaps on this image here from Matteo Salvini, who is himself heading over to Libya today. Now, both Italy and Malta putting the emphasis on Libya, Libya's Coast Guard and Libya's authorities to be involved in the rescue efforts and leading those rescue efforts, as opposed to what he calls here intervening NGOs. So a developing situation. We'll have the latest for you as it happens. Tessa.
Thank you, Alex, for bringing us that part of this really complicated story. Thank you, Alex. And Italy was among the countries pushing for their concerns to be at the top of the agenda at Sunday's summit. Euronews correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us now live from Rome to talk about what happened and what to expect this week. Claudio, the Italian Prime Minister, he seemed happy coming out of the Sunday's talks. Can we say that this is a win for Italy?
Well, Tessa, rather than a win, perhaps what really came out of this meeting was that Italy should be satisfied that it is playing the game in the first place, because this is what Italy wanted. It wanted other European countries to sit down around a table to talk about how to change the rules that are actually in place right now in Europe to deal with migration ahead of the more important and official meeting at the summit on migration at the European Council this Thursday and Friday. And it did that, and that is in fact a win for Italy. But this kind of positive attitude that came out of the meeting was echoed in a way by Angela Merkel, who said that there was a lot of goodwill that came out of that meeting. But perhaps Italy's attitude towards migration in the last couple of weeks since the new interior minister came into this job that has attracted a lot more criticism than praises or solidarity recently. For instance, yesterday before the meeting, Macron, the president of France said that, yes, sure, of course, every other European country should help Italy to share the burden of migration. But he also said that France does not accept lessons from anybody when it comes in terms of migration. And that, of course, is a reference to last week's spat between Italy and France. Also, Spain's new Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, said that Italy's attitude towards migration is anti-European, and Malta's Prime Minister Muscat said that this is not a time for the blame game. And yet, Tesa, the blame game here continues.
Indeed. Thank you for that. Claudio Lavanga reporting there from Rome. And still to come for you on the program, as thousands take to the streets of the British capital to demand a new Brexit vote. Well, the war of words between business leaders and politicians deepens. And U.S. President Trump says that people crossing the border illegally should not even have a judicial case to stay and should be sent straight back. Well, this as thousands of families are being separated. But first, let's have a short break. You're watching Good Morning Europe, our top story. Another term for Turkey's President Erdogan. In the first round of a presidential poll, the country's election authority says he's won 53% of the vote, securing a fresh 5-year term. The opposition has yet to officially concede. To the UK now, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets of London calling for a final vote on Brexit. European Union flags and Union Jacks met as protesters from all walks of life gathered in Westminster demanding a final say on the exit deal between the UK and the EU. British MEPs joined the march, and there was much criticism of the British government. The Liberal Democrats Party leader Vince Cable also took to the stage, where he told the crowd that Brexit was not a done deal. Well, that protest comes as the British government ministers criticize UK businesses for voicing their concerns about leaving the European Union. With Britain's exit date less than 12 months away, politicians and businesses in the UK appear to remain at odds. Well, live in London, we have your news correspondent Vincent McAviney with the latest. Vincent, what exactly has been said?
Good morning, Tessa. This latest flare-up between businesses and the British government on Brexit started on Friday, when the bosses of Airbus, the airplane manufacturer, and BMW, which also makes Mini and Rolls-Royce, said that they would have to stop manufacturing in the UK if there was a no-deal Brexit scenario, where the UK loses access to the single market and customs union with no alternative ready to go. Now, those two businesses employ tens of thousands of people across this country, but the government didn't welcome their intervention. The Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, he criticised them, saying that taking no-deal Brexit off the table, as these businesses were calling for, undermined the government's negotiation strategy at a crucial time. And the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, speaking yesterday, had a stronger rebuke for businesses in making these interventions.
Well, I just thought it's completely inappropriate for businesses to be making these kinds of threats for one very simple reason. We are in an absolutely critical moment in the Brexit discussions. And the more that we undermine Theresa May, the more likely we are to end up with a fudge, which would be an absolute disaster for everyone.
British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has also gone even further. There's some comments reportedly from him that have emerged over the weekend on the so-called Project Fear that businesses are said to be using. When asked earlier in the month about this at an event, he used a 4-letter expletive to describe business. Now, those businesses, though, do seem to be increasingly worried about the uncertainty. The 5 biggest business groups here in the UK, including the CBI and the Institute of Directors, wrote a joint letter to the Prime Minister over the weekend after this flare-up on Friday. They also sent this to Jean-Claude Juncker and to Donald Tusk, saying that tens of thousands of jobs in the UK are now at risk, in billions of pounds to the UK economy if the pace isn't picked up. And they are calling for Britain's businesses to have more of a say on this final deal as the clock ticks down to the end of the negotiations next March.
All right, thank you for that Brexit update. Vincent McAviney there in London. Now, the EU will respond to any U.S. move to raise tariffs on cars made in the bloc. The comments were made by EU Commission Vice President Jyrki Katainen in an interview with Le Monde newspaper. And they come after President Trump threatened to impose 20% tariffs on all imports of EU-made cars. And amid an escalating trade row that's already slapped duties on imports of European steel and aluminium. Katainen said that, quote, if they decide to raise their import tariffs, we'll have no choice again but to react. And to make sense of this escalating trade war, I'm joined by our business editor, Sasha Vakulina. Sasha, good to have you with us. So we have Trump targeting European cars now. What impact will this have?
Well, presumably that would have quite a big impact, Tessa. You're absolutely right, because the industry is very important for the European Union, for the economy and for the international trade flows. Now, let's look at the latest available data by the Eurostat. That's per 2016. So European manufacturers sold about 48 billion euros worth of vehicles to the US, which accounted for a quarter of all EU auto exports. Germany was responsible for over a half. Now, this sector provides jobs for 12 million people in the European Union and accounts for 4% of the EU's GDP in total. Interesting fact, there are already tariffs in place. Now, the US actually imposes a 2.5% tariff on all the passengers' cars and a 25% tariff on the imported pickup trucks. As for the EU, it imposes a tariff of 10% on all the American cars. According to the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, any trade restrictive measures, and I quote here the association, will have serious negative impact not only on the EU but also on the US and the global economy, because of course European automakers not only they sell the cars to the US but they also have their factories there.
Yeah, indeed, I want to raise that point, the impact on the US itself. So on that side of the story, what would this growing dispute mean for those factories in the United States?
Now, in total, all the big three German brands, they employ in the US around 50,000 people. And actually, the BMW's world's largest plant is in the US, in South Carolina. When it comes to the US premium market in particular, now German brands, they control 90% of that market in the US. So the impact could be quite big. Presumably, the cars built in the US plants would not be affected by the tariffs, but we could expect the German brands to scale back their investment and, of course, the European Union to react with more tariffs or threats coming.
All right, thank you for keeping an eye on that. Sasha Vakulina, our business editor. And still to come in the program, Angela Merkel may be expressing optimism after a summit on the migrant crisis. But how will this play out at home? Plus, over in the Cube.
We're talking what next for women in Saudi Arabia. That's after a short break.
You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Now, women in Saudi Arabia have been allowed to drive for the first time, but attention is turning to another of the kingdom's controversial laws. Alex has more on this. Alex.
I do, Tessa. Welcome to theCUBE. Good morning. Our team here in our social media centre, Rachel, Emmanuel and Eric, are keeping across all developments and all big stories. And obviously, a historic weekend. Women in Saudi Arabia being allowed to drive for the first time. But rather than sitting back and resting on their laurels, they are kicking off the next stage of campaigning for equal rights in the kingdom with a campaign #MilesForFreedom. Now, this has been founded by Manal Al-Sharif. She is a Saudi Arabian woman, and she is now wanting this campaign to move towards tackling male guardianship laws in the country. Now, there are also two main aims, I suppose you could say she has. The first is to see the release of these women. These activists are still in prison. They were leading voices campaigning for women to be allowed to drive. Now women can drive. These women are still in prison. So the first aim of Manal Al-Sharif's campaign is to get these women released. And secondly, it is, as I say, to challenge the male guardianship laws, which at the moment mean women have to ask men's permission if they want to get a passport to leave the country. So still very restrictive in that respect. So how does the campaign work and what is it? Well, Manal Al-Sharif is inviting women all over the world to clock up and share the miles they are driving. The idea was to reach 1 million miles as opposed to just a signature on a petition. Once she reached 1 million miles, she'd send this driving petition to the Saudi king calling for change. Well, it went viral, and the current total, if we can pull this up here, is, wait for it to upload, here we go, more than 3 times what she expected, over 3 million miles. Women all around the world clocking up the distances they are driving adding to this site and updating it. The idea being women all over the world uniting with a big number here to put pressure on Saudi authorities to listen to the key message of this new campaign calling for this wonderful change for driving to now be extended to give women freedom in many other areas of their life. And a huge number of people on social media in Saudi Arabia praising Manal al-Sharif for this, including this user here saying, "All the respect to you and the rest of the brave women." Now, needless to say, conservative elements in Saudi Arabia had a problem with women driving, and understandably, you can understand that those conservative elements are still having problems with this latest campaign. But again, social media at the forefront of calls for change in Saudi Arabia. Are you a woman? Are you driving? Are you getting involved? You can let us know your thoughts using #TheCube.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. Now, Prince William has begun a historic tour of the Middle East. Arriving on Royal Air Force One, Prince William was greeted by Jordanian guards and Crown Prince Al Hussein bin Abdullah II. The 5-day tour will see the prince visit Israel and Palestinian territory and meet with the leaders of both. It is the first visit by a British royal to the region. We'll have our top stories ahead for you, including another term for Turkish President Erdogan after he won that key snap election there. And this image that has really sparked an outpouring of generosity, surpassing all expectations. And that volcano that's still erupting. But first, let's have a look at our no comment of the day from Northern California, where high winds are fueling forest fires, spanning some 30 square kilometers of land. Our top stories in Good Morning Europe: securing power. Turkey's Erdogan wins high-stakes elections, surviving the most serious challenge yet to his position and tightening his grip on power. No consensus. EU leaders walk away empty-handed as a mini-summit on migration ends on a deeply divided note. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
We have the latest on the 2 ships we told you about Friday, with over 300 rescued migrants aboard, still with nowhere to go.
And who's in and who's going home. We wrap up all the action at the World Cup in Russia. Our top story: so much for the challenge to Turkey's President Erdogan. Well, he appears to have won his gamble, winning his snap election with the endorsement of a big turnout. That's despite opposition claims of fraud. United for the first time against Erdogan and his AK party, polls suggested the opposition would progress and even end his unchallenged hold on power. But that has not happened. And speaking in Ankara, Erdogan addressed supporters, calling it a festival of democracy.
The winner of this election is every citizen of our 81 million population who've participated in the festival of democracy. I thank every one of them.
Well, let's head now to Paris, where European Affairs analyst Stefan de Vries is standing by for us. Stefan, what do we make of these stronger presidential powers? It's about to get stronger. How will the Europeans and his NATO allies react to this?
Well, of course, Erdogan changed the job of the Turkish president from a symbolic chief of state into an authoritarian autocrat. And the European Union and the NATO really have to rely on this autocrat because for the European Union, of course, we have an important deal to maintain the Syrian refugees in Turkey. The European Union pays around 6 billion euros to Turkey to contain the migrant issue. So that's an important partner. But also, of course, for NATO, due to its geographical position, Turkey is a very important ally between the West and the Arab world. Now, Erdogan has been flirting recently with Russia. He has been buying military stuff from Russia, so that's already a threat to the alliance. But also, Turkey is needed because of the fight against the so-called Islamic State. So a very difficult position for the European Union and the NATO, but unfortunately they have to deal with Erdogan, and there's actually, well, no other solution.
Yeah, indeed. So Turkey is a partner on some very important issues that concern Europe as well. But the West has been very critical of Erdogan. But he still seems to get a lot of support from the Turks who live in Europe. How can we explain that?
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting. In Europe, there are around 4 to 6 million Turks living mainly in Germany, the Benelux and France. And they were also allowed to vote yesterday. About a third of those people showed up at the polls in those countries. And we see a huge support for Erdogan. About 65% in Belgium, 65% also in France and Germany. It looks like these people who are usually, well, most of them are born actually in Europe. They support a conservative leader, a very authoritarian leader, and maybe it also reflects the rise of the anti-immigrant parties in those countries. Maybe the Turks living there, they have sympathy for a strong leader, as we've seen is also the case in, for instance, Hungary with Viktor Orban, or even in the United States with Donald Trump. So the massive support for Erdogan on the on the European mainland basically shows the huge polarization, not only in the European society, but actually in politics in general.
All right, thank you for that. European affairs analyst Stefan de Vries, thanks. Now, Italy said it was, quote, decidedly satisfied coming out of talks on migration in Brussels yesterday. But there's some suggestion many issues are still on the table ahead of a bloc-wide summit later this week. All eyes in Brussels were on two figures, new Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte, whose government has adopted a hardline policy on immigration, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who faces a tough political challenge at home because of her years-old open-door migration rules. A new survey suggests that divisions within Angela Merkel's conservative bloc, they're widening with the anti-immigrant AfD party on the rise. Well, our correspondent Jessica Saltz joins me now to discuss this. Jessica, Merkel, she was a bit optimistic coming out of that summit, but is that well-founded?
Well, Tessa, the headline in Der Spiegel, the political magazine this morning, saying Angela Merkel fighting to save her chancellorship. Certainly we feel that Angela Merkel's leadership is on the line with this issue. She's really been pushed into a corner by her Bavarian sister party, the CSU, on the issue of migration. And there are reports coming out of Bavaria that the CSU is bolstering their police forces there, ready to spring into action next week and turn migrants away from the border there if Angela Merkel is not able to come up with what they consider to be a viable solution to the migration crisis. So certainly the pressure is certainly on. And we only heard broad strokes from Angela Merkel yesterday after this mini summit in Brussels. Yes, she spoke on issues such as strengthening security forces at the external borders of the EU, something her critics are calling for, but this won't be enough to silence them. Angela Merkel will be meeting with her CDU party in Berlin today to discuss migration. She has broad support from the CDU, and it is thought over the next few days she will be trying to make steps forward on bilateral levels by speaking to EU leaders, such as with the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, who is expected to come to Berlin tomorrow.
Yeah, and of course, as we see her under pressure, this is to the advantage of, the AfD party, as this new poll suggests. Does Merkel have reason to fear what the polls are saying?
Well, Tessa, this is not only threatening her conservative alliance with the CSU, but this is really weighing heavily on public opinion. The most recent opinion polls from yesterday show that the CDU-CSU alliance has slipped to 31%. This is their lowest result since November. Now, this coalition government of Conservatives and Social Democrats took an embarrassingly long 6 months to form by March. And the feeling in Germany is that since then, these parties have spent more time squabbling with each other than making progress. Certainly German people I speak to say, yes, the migration issue is important, but these parties are spending too much time discussing it when they should be focusing on more important domestic issues. So this is also worrying for Merkel, that public opinion is affected by this, and public opinion is also a worrying sign for the CSU party. They are also slipping in opinion polls regionally in Bavaria, ahead of what for them is a very critical regional election coming up in October.
All right, thank you for that, Jessica Saltz in Berlin there. Thanks. Now, Donald Trump has derided U.S. immigration policy as, quote, laughed at all over the world. Well, as we showed in the Cube last week, pictures of separated families have sparked protests at the U.S. border. But the U.S. president, he's renewed his call for people entering the country illegally to be sent back without seeing a judge. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell has more.
During the president's motorcade ride to his Virginia golf course today, he fired off on Twitter, ignoring existing legal rights for undocumented immigrants. We must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back from where they came. The president's edict fails to recognize constitutional due process, long-established case law that grants that protection to non-citizens. But that did not stop the idea from bubbling this week.
I don't want judges, I want border security. I don't want judges, I want Border Patrol, I want ICE.
The president vents his frustration at Congress after House Republicans could not decide on legislation to address the border crisis, and he made Democrats his target.
It's the Democrats' fault, but it wouldn't be their fault for long if they sat down with us. We could make a deal so quickly.
Democrats, including some who made trips to the border this week, argue their party has been kept out of negotiations, an impasse that fuels the campaign year fight. Illinois Democrat Luis Gutierrez.
It's wrong to separate babies, to use cruel, inhumane policies in order to gin up your political base. And it seems like it's working.
In a new interview with Christian media outlet TBN, the president says he wants to impose a financial punishment on migrants' home countries in Central America.
You take a country like Honduras or so many others, they're sending people into our country by the thousands. I think we should stop giving them money.
But just days ago, Vice President Pence met the leader of Honduras here at the White House and declared a strong partnership.
Kelly O'Donnell reporting there. Now, American taxi app Uber is in a London court today where it will appeal a decision which saw the firm denied an operating license for the British capital. It comes after TfL, that's the Public Transport Authority in London, chose not to renew the taxi firm's license over concerns about public safety last September. Uber say that they have made significant changes to the app, as well as appointing independent directors to their firms. The court's decision is expected later this week. And still to come for you on the program, we have more on Saudi women finally getting the green light to get behind the wheel as the law banning them from driving is overturned. That and more after the break. Our top story on Good Morning Europe, Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his AK party have claimed victory in Turkey's presidential and parliamentary elections. The opposition hasn't officially conceded yet, but says it will continue its democratic struggle, quote, whatever the result. It's the first round win he was hoping for, and it gives him sweeping new powers. It is 2 months since Hawaii's Mount Kilauea volcano started erupting, and there are no signs yet that it's about to start slowing down. Euronews' Nick Wells has the update.
Hawaii's Kilauea volcano is showing no signs of letting up, with lava flows again creeping dangerously close to homes. Volcanologists said an explosion at the summit late on Saturday produced energy equivalent to a magnitude 5.3 earthquake. The eruption, which began at the end of April, is the most destructive in the United States since Mount St. Helens in 1980, which killed nearly 60 people. No one has died in Hawaii, but at least 600 homes have been destroyed.
Nigeria's Central Plateau state has seen numerous acts of violence, that's according to the authorities. With many clashes between Muslim herders and Christian farmers, at least 86 people have died and some 50 homes destroyed. And there are fears that the long-running competition for resources may be about to become more extreme and bring even more unrest to another region of the country. Well, it's been a mostly peaceful election campaign in Zimbabwe so far until this weekend when a ruling party rally was bombed. No one was killed, but some 50 people were injured. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe. In case you missed it, the rumors that Egyptian footballer Mo Salah is considering quitting his national team because he's angry about being used as a political symbol in Chechnya, and the online campaign that's already begun to convince him to stay. We'll be back after a short break. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Now, history has been made in Saudi Arabia, with women finally being given the green light to get behind the wheel. As the last country in the world to lift a ban on female motorists, it was an extraordinary event, as NBC's Kelly Kobieya reports.
A victory lap for women's rights. Across Saudi Arabia, women hit the road for the first time, ending a decades-old ban.
It's really historic, not only for Saudi women, for every woman. We achieved something.
Until now, women relied on drivers or male relatives to get to work and school, risking a fine, even arrest for driving themselves.
It will be easier to get around whenever I want and to go wherever I want. Financially, it will take less of my paycheck.
The move, part of the young Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's massive reform effort.
Are you ready? I am ready.
Women like Asil Al-Hamad can now start their own businesses without a man's permission. She's an interior designer with a passion for fast cars.
We're so happy because women have proven themselves in many aspects. It's nice to be in control and to be in the driver's seat, right?
Yeah. Women here still don't have complete control over their own lives. They need a man's permission to get a passport, travel abroad, or get married. Even as the government opens the roads to women, it's cracking down on women's rights activists. Yet many women told me the country is changing for the better.
We're happy and we want more now.
You want more now?
Yes.
For Saudi women, it's full speed ahead. Kelly Kobieya, NBC News, Riyadh.
To football now. There were goals galore on Sunday as several teams booked their places in the World Cup knockout phase. Tukumbo Salako rounds up all the results.
England's Lions put on their dancing feet to celebrate as their team made history in the best of ways for a change. Harry Kane was the hat-trick hero as England fired 6 past Panama to record their biggest ever win in a World Cup. What's more, the result means England now match their Group G rivals Belgium on goal difference, so both sides will play for top spot on Thursday, knowing the winner could eventually face favourites Brazil in the quarter-finals. It's all over now for Panama, but their fans were simply delighted the team scored a goal in their first ever World Cup. From tears of joy to tears of sadness, Poland's World Cup campaign is over. They crashed out after being routed by Colombia 3-0, which revives their hopes of progressing. It all now goes down to the wire in Group H after a 2-2 draw between Japan and Senegal, arguably Russia's favourite teams because of their fans' clean-up campaigns in their stadiums. Tukumbo Salako, Euronews.
Now, rumors are swirling that one of the World Cup's most popular players, Egyptian striker Mohamed Salah, he's considering quitting from the national team. And that's because he's been used as a political symbol in Chechnya. Alex has more on this story. Alex.
Tesa, I do. And Mohamed Salah, Egyptian star at the front of their team, he has been staying with the whole team in Chechnya. And it's this event on Friday that really sparked these rumours. This is a photograph showing Salah at a dinner hosted by Chechen authorities. And this here is the Chechen leader. Now, why is this controversial? Well, as we said, Salah is a legend of international and club football. Now, the Kadyrov, the leader of Chechnya, his administration have been accused of human rights abuses by Western governments and rights groups, including discriminating against women and also against LGBT and sexual minorities. Now, to have these two together, as I say, the Egyptian Football Association sharing this picture of a meal they shared, obviously this is a controversial image. And the Associated Press news agency suggested that Salah was frustrated about being put in this position and therefore being used as a political symbol in this context, and so was considering quitting the national team. Now, that has been refuted since by the national team, who say there is no trouble here. Either way, though, Salah's fans on social media got talking, and they came out in support of him. This tweet here saying, look, leave politics out of Salah's name. Let him focus on his football for Egypt. And this hashtag here, translating to I stand with Salah, But there were people who understood where Salah might be coming from. This message here saying, look, we understand if you don't want to be put in a position like this, and therefore you can't represent Egypt again, because people might see this as others trying to destroy your image by using you as a symbol in that context. But they're saying, look, we'll stand by you. You are the dream of 100 million. So rumours circulate, nothing yet from Salah, but a controversial image nonetheless. Tessa.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. And thank you for joining us in Good Morning Europe. Do stay with Euronews throughout the day for all of your top stories. And we'll leave you with today's No Comment. Street scenes from overnight in Turkey following an election that gave Recep Tayyip Erdogan a new term as president.